Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Every comment helps these disturbing stories find their way back to you. Now, let's step into the darkness. I was 28 when I transferred to Crescent Falls National Park in Wyoming, a place that most people described as peaceful, untouched, heavenly. Every adjective that doesn't belong anywhere near the truth. There's an old saying among rangers, pretty parks hide the ugliest secrets, and Crescent Falls was basically a poster child for that. Its lakes were so clear you could see down 30 feet. Its pines seemed to hum in the evening wind. Its cliffs caught sunlight like mirrors. And yet, for all its beauty, I noticed immediately that none of the senior rangers stayed after dark if they could help it. They'd pack up fast, too fast. They'd leave the visitor center lights on, doors locked, radios off, driving out with windows up, and a weird tightness in their shoulders, like the forest was leaning forward as they left. On my third week, my supervisor, Ranger Cole Maddox, called me into the gear shed at closing time. Maddox was in his 50s, graying beard, eyes that always looked like he'd slept 3 hours at most. He was one of those men who never said something twice unless he was deadly serious. He checked the straps on his pack, then looked up at me. "Just so you know," he said, "if any hikers ask about Ridgeview Loop, don't take them. Redirect them to Elk Ridge or Bear Hollow. If they push, call me. Don't ever walk that trail yourself unless I tell you otherwise." He didn't smile, didn't blink, didn't even explain, and that was the part that left me uneasy. Because if it were something simple, fallen trees, washed out bridges, loose rocks, he would have told me. But instead, he just said it like a man admitting there's something in the house the family doesn't talk about. I didn't ask. Rookies don't ask. And that was my mistake. 2 evenings later, I was finishing my patrol around 7:40 p.m., that weird twilight hour where the sky is still orange but the ground already feels like night has landed. The park had officially closed at 6:30, meaning everyone should have been gone. Crescent Falls emptied fast because the temperature always dropped brutally once the sun dipped behind the mountains. The wind grew sharper, colder, more aggressive. Even the wildlife retreated early this time of year. I was halfway through my final loop when a sound floated across the tree line, a strained male voice yelling, "Hello? Is anyone out here? Someone, please." I stopped dead. The shout came from deep inside the forest, specifically the direction of Ridgeview Loop. My pulse kicked up. Lost hiker, injured, possibly hypothermic. After dark, with temperatures dropping into the 40s, that was a race against the clock. I grabbed my radio. "Maddox, do you copy? I've got a potential lost hiker near Ridgeview Loop." Only static answered. I tried again. Nothing. Typical. Dead zone. The man's voice cried out again, this time weaker. "Help. I think I'm lost." I should have waited for backup. Protocol demanded it. But the thing about protocol is that it wasn't written by people who've actually found frozen hikers curled beside trees, at dawn with their fingers stiff and their faces blue. I've seen it. And I wasn't going to wait. I turned toward the trail, turned on my headlamp, and stepped past the old trail closed sign, whose chain sagged like it had been ripped or cut a long time ago. The air changed immediately. It wasn't wind or temperature. It was silence. Not nighttime silence. Not forest silence. But dead silence. The kind that made even my breathing sound wrong. The kind of quiet that made you feel like the trees were listening. Ridgeview Loop was narrower than I expected. The dirt was darker, softer, almost spongy in places like it had been disturbed. Pine needles carpeted everything, but I could still make out fresh boot prints. Not mine, not Maddox's. Someone had been through here recently, and not calmly. The steps were uneven, staggered, like whoever wore them had been running or stumbling. "Hello?" I called out, my voice bouncing awkwardly between the trees. "Keep calling so I can find you." There was no response. 5 minutes in, my headlamp caught something thrown off the trail, a backpack half buried in pine needles. I walked over and picked it up. The front pocket zipper was broken. The fabric was still warm where hands had gripped it hard. The stitched name tag inside read P. Whitaker. My stomach sank. Whitaker was the hiker who checked in earlier that morning. He asked about Ridgeview. Maddox redirected him. So how the hell did he end up here? As I lifted the bag, something wet ran across my fingers. Cold sweat absorbed in the strap. Fresh. The pack looked like someone had been clutching it while running for their life. I stood up, scanning the area. "Whitaker, are you hurt?" Only the emptiness answered. That's when my radio crackled. Not the usual static. Something more deliberate. A strained whisper. "Turn. Back." The bottom of my spine went cold. "Maddox, did you copy? Say again." Static. Then, "Alex, turn back. Now." My hand began to shake. My radio didn't have signal out here. It couldn't have. So how was anyone getting through? A sharp rustling in the brush to my left made me jump. I swung my headlamp toward the sound but saw nothing except tall pines and shadows that seemed to stretch too far. Another 5 feet ahead, something stuck out from under a layer of needles. A shoelace, attached to a hiking boot lying sideways on the ground. I knelt, swallowing hard. The boot wasn't torn or chewed or damaged. It had been pulled off, cleanly, like someone yanked it off fast. I touched the sock inside and almost jerked my hand back. Warm, knotted warm. Still body heat warm. Whitaker had been here not minutes ago, seconds maybe. I slowly straightened up, scanning the trees. Something felt wrong. The taller pines seemed to narrow. The air felt tight. And then came a sound that turned my insides upside down. Breathing. Slow, controlled, behind me. I froze. The breathing grew slightly louder, like whoever was behind me was trying to keep it quiet but failing. My muscles locked, my hand hovering over the bear spray at my hip. And then, the breathing stopped. Silence again. A thick, heavy, expectant silence. Then a whisper touched the back of my ear, as clear as if the mouth saying it was on my skin. He told me not to be here after dark. I spun so hard I nearly smashed my headlamp against a tree. No one. Just empty trail stretching 20 feet ahead. My heart hammered. My lungs burned. My throat tightened with the instinctive awareness that something was very, very wrong in these woods. I started backing up, slow and steady, when footsteps slammed against the dirt behind me. Fast, uneven, crashing through the underbrush. I spun around again, headlamp shaking violently, and the beam caught a man stumbling out from between the trees. Barefoot, pants shredded, shirt half torn off his back. Eyes wide like he hadn't slept in days, but it was his hands that made my stomach bottom out. His fingernails were packed with dirt, deep dark earth jammed up to the cuticles. His knuckles scraped raw, his wrists coated in clotted soil, like he'd been clawing something in the ground, like he'd clawed until his hands bled. He staggered forward, and his lips trembled as he forced out words in a voice so hollow it barely sounded human. "Ranger," he said, "he's not done with me yet." And that was when I realized something deeper, darker, was moving behind him in the trees. Not a shadow, not an animal, something human. Someone else was out here. Someone watching us. Someone waiting. And Whitaker's eyes didn't look terrified of me. They looked terrified of whatever he'd left behind in the woods. Whitaker's breathing sounded ragged, too fast, too shallow, like every inhale scraped his throat raw. He looked at me and then over his shoulder again like he expected someone to lunge out of the dark at any second. I raised my hand slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. Peter Whitaker. I'm Ranger Alex Dawson. You're safe now, all right? I need you to tell me what happened." His lips trembled like he wanted to speak, but couldn't bring himself to. Then a twig snapped deeper in the trees. Whitaker flinched so violently he almost fell. I grabbed his arm to steady him, but he jerked away, whispering furiously, "He's still out here." His eyes darted back and forth, scanning every shadow. Don't stand so close. He follows voices. My skin crawled. Who's following you? Whitaker didn't answer. Instead, he whispered something so faint I almost didn't catch it. He told me to keep walking. He told me to sleep when he sleeps, to stop when he stops, to not run. I ran. It hit me like a punch. He wasn't describing wildlife. He wasn't describing a stranger on the trail. He was describing someone controlling him, someone giving commands. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Whitaker, is someone hunting you? His jaw clenched. His eyes welled, not with tears, but with sheer terror. He dug holes, he whispered. Deep, narrow, just wide enough for... He didn't finish. His voice cracked. Before I could press him, a slow crunch of leaves echoed from the darkness. Deliberate, measured, like someone stepping specifically where dry leaves were. Whitaker's face drained of color. Without warning, he gripped my jacket with dirt-caked fingers. If he sees your light, he'll mark you too. I flicked off the headlamp instantly. Darkness swallowed us whole. My heart pounded as my eyes strained to adjust. The woods at night are a disorienting maze. Depth disappears, distances stretch. Everything becomes noise and silhouettes. I held my breath as the footsteps grew closer, stopping somewhere no more than 20 feet away. Whoever it was, wasn't speaking, wasn't calling out, wasn't rushing toward us. They were just listening, the kind of listening a predator does. Still patient, waiting for movement. Whitaker squeezed my arm once, hard, and mouthed, "Don't breathe." I didn't. Neither did he. For a moment, all I heard was the faint rustle of leaves under some unseen boot. Then, a slow inhale from the direction of the footsteps. Someone was smelling the air. Every muscle in my body tensed so hard it hurt. I didn't dare reach for my radio. The click would give us away. So I stayed frozen, balanced between fight and flight. After what felt like a full minute, the footsteps drifted away into the trees. I waited another 30 seconds before whispering, "We're moving. Now." Whitaker didn't argue. He moved like a wounded deer, shaking, limp, terrified. As we went back down the trail, I kept the headlamp off and used only the pale moonlight bleeding through the canopy to guide us. It was barely enough to see 5 feet ahead, but we didn't have a choice. "What does he look like?" I asked quietly. Whitaker swallowed hard. I didn't see his face. Not once. He kept telling me to keep my eyes down. If I looked up, he'd stop walking. And when he stopped walking, I heard him digging. Cold prickles crawled down my arms. Digging what? What did he want? I asked. Whitaker's answer was the softest whisper yet. Company. A chill went straight through me. We reached a bend in the trail when something glinted near the base of a tree, a small metal object half buried in the dirt. I crouched and brushed it off. A knife. Small, sharp, clean, except for dried dirt packed under the blade. Whitaker's breath hitched. That's his. He used it to mark trees, to make paths. I scanned the trunk in front of us. There, carved into the bark, was a long vertical slash and a smaller horizontal one. Primitive, but deliberate. A marking, a sign. And it wasn't the only one. 10 feet away, another tree. 12 feet beyond that, another. A trail not made by nature, but by someone staking territory. I straightened and whispered, "How long were you out here with him?" Whitaker rubbed his filthy hands over his face like he was trying to wipe the memory away. 2 nights, maybe 3. I stopped keeping track after he made me sleep in that hole. My blood turned to ice. He made you sleep. Where? Whitaker pointed toward the darkness. He digs narrow pits, like graves, but deeper. You sleep standing, with dirt up to your shoulders. If you move too much, the dirt collapses and... He choked on his words. That explained the dirt on his hands. He'd clawed himself out. Why didn't he leave? I whispered. Why stay with him at all? You're faster. Whitaker's voice was barely a breath. He never sleeps deeply. He said he'd hear me breathing if I tried to run. He said he liked when people panicked, because panic makes them sloppy. Easy. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a random psycho. This was someone who'd done this before. We reached the old trail closed sign, but when I lifted my radio to call for backup, a different voice crackled through the static. AX. Turn around. Not Maddox. Someone else. Someone whispering. Whitaker grabbed my arm so hard I winced. Don't turn around. He has a radio. He stole mine the first night. My pulse spiked. He's listening. Whitaker nodded. And he hates when you call for help. The radio crackled again, this time louder, more distorted. Turn. AX. Turn around, now. The voice wasn't whispering anymore. It was giving an order. One that wasn't meant to protect me, but to freeze me. The crunch of footsteps exploded behind us. Not slow this time. Running. Fast. Charging. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Whitaker's arm and shoved him over the boundary line of the trail. Run. Now. We sprinted through the dark, lungs burning, branches whipping our faces, the pounding footsteps behind us shaking the ground. Whitaker stumbled twice but kept moving. I pushed him ahead, my own breath sharp and ragged. Whoever was behind us wasn't yelling, wasn't threatening. He was silent. And that silence was the worst thing I've ever heard. We burst through the final tree line into the clearing near the ranger station, just as a vehicle's headlights swept across the lot. A truck. Maddox's truck. He jumped out before it fully stopped, reaching for his holstered gun as he sprinted toward us. But just as he reached me, Whitaker collapsed to his knees, sobbing, and gasped a sentence that made Maddox freeze mid-step. Don't let him put me back in that hole. Maddox's eyes shot toward the dark tree line behind us. Someone stood there, just inside the shadow, perfectly still, watching, not hiding. Watching us. I saw the faintest outline of a man, broad shoulders, dark jacket, head tilted like he was studying us. He didn't move when Maddox raised his weapon. He didn't run, didn't speak. He just lifted one hand and traced a slow, vertical line in the air with his finger. Maddox's face drained, because that was the same mark carved into the trees. By the time he took a step forward, the figure had already backed into the darkness, vanishing behind the line of pines, not running, just slipping away, like he knew we wouldn't follow. And he was right, we didn't. Whitaker was shaking so hard, Maddox and I had to carry him inside. He kept repeating a single sentence under his breath, over and over, eyes wide and unfocused. He watches the trail, he waits. He waits for people to step over the line. And the part that still haunts me, when search teams arrived the next morning, they didn't find footprints. Not one. Not even where we saw him standing. But they did find something else. A freshly dug hole. 6 feet deep, narrow, shaped like a body. And inside at the very bottom, pressed into the dirt wall, was a mark carved with something sharp. A long vertical slash. And a shorter horizontal one. His sign, his claim, and the beginning of the next hole he was planning to fill. With someone. I was 31 when I transferred to North Cascade Lookout District in Washington State, a ranger station built more out of habit than necessity. The mountains out there are huge, jagged, endless, so many trails that even locals don't know half of them. On my first week, the district manager, Ranger Dana Keller, drove me up the old service road to show me the fire lookouts and maintenance cabins scattered through the forest. One of them sat deeper than the rest, a lopsided, rotting single-room cabin with a sagging porch and a rusted stovepipe. It looked abandoned for decades. Dana didn't even slow down. She just kept her eyes forward, knuckles tightening on the steering wheel, and muttered, "We don't maintain that one." I asked why. She said nothing. She didn't look at me. She only pressed the gas a little harder. 2 days later, during patrol orientation, I noticed something strange. Every ranger's map had a black marker slash over that cabin's location. Not an X, a slash. A deliberate black stroke, like the cartographer hadn't wanted to erase it, only hide it. When I asked another ranger, Terrence, he told me quietly, "That's Barlow Cabin. Don't go there, no matter what you hear, no matter who says they're inside." He said it so casually that I laughed because I thought he was messing with me. He didn't laugh back. He just stared at the coffee in his cup like he was remembering something he wanted desperately to forget. I shrugged it off. Remote cabins attract weird stories. Every ranger station has one. The do not enter place where teenagers sneak in and homeless wanderers shelter. I figured it was nothing more than that. But 2 nights after I dismissed it, something happened that forced the truth on me. It was around 8:20 p.m. I was doing a last sweep before closing the northern trailheads when my radio crackled with a faint, frantic voice. "Is anyone there? Please. Someone. Please, I need help." The tone wasn't the usual lost hiker tone. It had a tremble, a freeze-your-blood kind of desperation. I stopped walking. "Identify yourself," I said. "Where are you located?" The reply came back choked with static. "At the cabin." The cabin. My chest tightened. There were multiple cabins in the district. "Which cabin?" I asked again. And then the voice said a single word. "Barlow." My stomach flipped. I asked for his name. No answer. I asked if he was hurt. Static. I asked if he could repeat. Only breathing. Heavy, uneven breathing. Then the radio went dead. I tried again. Nothing. I changed channels. Nothing. I even switched batteries. The radio remained silent. I called into base on the main frequency. I got a distress call from Barlow Cabin. Silence. Then Dana's voice snapped through the speaker like a whip. "Do not go to that cabin. I'm sending someone to meet you at the gate. Stand by, do not approach." She sounded more panicked than the caller. More panicked than I'd ever heard a ranger sound. But the problem was, I wasn't anywhere near the gate. I was nearly a mile from the cabin already, and the mountains were swallowing the rest of the light. If someone was inside, injured, freezing, or pinned, they wouldn't last another hour. Snow was expected overnight. Temperatures were already dropping. The radio crackled again, this time softer, more broken. Please come back. He's here." My heart hammered. He wasn't a black bear. He wasn't a cougar. He was a person, and the caller said, "Come back," which meant he'd tried to leave once already. I started toward the service road before I even decided I was going. I justified it as following protocol, locating the person, assessing condition, making contact. But deep down, I knew this was not protocol. This was instinct. Something in that man's voice sounded like he was clinging to life by a thread. The road to Barlow Cabin is rough even during the day. Uphill, narrow, uneven. At night, with only a headlamp and faint light from a half-visible moon, it felt endless. Halfway up, I found something in the dirt that made me stop. Fresh footprints, uneven, staggered, like someone had been running or stumbling hard. The size looked like a man's. The stride short and frantic, and trailing alongside those prints. Smaller marks, drag marks, something being pulled. Not an animal, not a sled, something the width of a forearm, something human-shaped. My chest tightened. I followed the prints. 10 minutes later, I saw the cabin through the trees. A dark rectangle with a half-collapsed porch and one window faintly reflecting moonlight. The door was shut. No lights on, no smoke from the chimney. It looked dead, completely dead, but the footprints led right up to the porch, and something else was on the porch floor. At first, it looked like leaves and dirt. But when I got closer, I saw it clearly. Deep scratches in the wood. Not animal scratches, human scratches. Fingernail scratches. Long lines where someone's nails had carved into the porch while trying to hold on. My heartbeat thudded so loud I could hear it. I stepped onto the porch. The boards sagged beneath my weight. I raised my flashlight to the window and froze so sharply I forgot to breathe. Someone stood inside the cabin, barely visible through the dirty glass, a silhouette, facing the door, not moving, Perfectly. Still. My flashlight beam trembled across the window, but the figure didn't flinch, didn't squint, didn't react. Just stood there, centered in the room like he'd been waiting for me to arrive. My throat dried. "Ranger service," I called. "If you need assistance, back away from the door." No response. No movement. I called again. Nothing. Then my radio crackled softly. "Don't open the door." I swallowed hard. "Who is this?" The voice came again, weak, barely, audible. "I'm under the floor. He put me under the floor. Don't let him know you hear me." My legs nearly buckled. Under the floor. I looked at the cabin silhouette again. The figure inside still hadn't moved. Not an inch, not a breath. No shifting, no head tilt, nothing. Like it wasn't a person. Like it was placed there. I stepped back from the door. My flashlight beam slid downward, across the base of the cabin, across the small ventilation gaps in the boards near the foundation. Mud, fresh mud, packed between the cracks, like someone had forced it in with their hands. I crouched low and aimed my light at the gap. There, between the boards, a single human eye stared back at me. Bloodshot, wide, terrified, barely visible in the dark. Before I could react, something moved inside the cabin. Not the figure, something behind it. A soft, deliberate shifting of weight. A slow step. The sound of boots on old wood. And a breath that didn't belong to the man under the floor. I went cold all over. The man inside wasn't trapped. He wasn't hurt. He was waiting. And now, he knew I was here. The moment I realized the man inside the cabin was not the victim, but the predator. Something shifted inside me. Something cold and primal. I backed off the porch one slow inch at a time, careful not to break eye contact with the silhouette. He wasn't moving, but I could feel him watching. Not seeing, watching. There's a difference. The man under the floor breathed so quietly, I only heard it when the wind died. His whisper came again, but it was trembling now, like he was trying to speak without his teeth touching. He doesn't talk. He doesn't get angry. He just waits for you to open the door. I kept my flashlight trained directly on the silhouette. My voice came out low and steady, even though my chest was pounding so hard it felt like it might crack. "I'm with the Ranger Service. I need you to step away from the door." The figure didn't respond. It didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't even sway with the weight of its body. It stood like a mannequin placed intentionally. Perfect posture, arms at its sides, head leveled dead center toward me. My brain kept screaming one thing. He wants me to come inside. I stepped off the porch slowly. The boards creaked under my boots, and as they did, the thing inside the cabin made a single sound. Not a footstep, not a voice, just the faintest inhale, like it was savoring the noise I made. When both my feet hit solid ground, I kept moving backward until the porch was no longer in reach. Then the man under the floor whispered again, urgently this time. He dragged me in at night. He told me to lie still. He nailed the boards over me and said he'd check on me every hour. I thought he was going to kill me, but he never does. He just keeps them under there. Them. Plural. My stomach flipped. There were more. I dropped into a squat near the cabin's foundation and whispered back, "How many?" The man didn't answer at first. I saw his eyes shift, looking behind him under the floorboards, scanning in panic. Then, barely audible, 3 were alive when he put me down. I don't know about now. He paused. He feeds them only enough so they don't die. He doesn't want them dead. He wants them quiet. Every hair on my arm stood straight. I needed backup, now. But as I reached for my radio, static exploded out of it. A violent, angry hiss that made the man beneath the cabin gasp. I looked up and froze. The silhouette inside the cabin had moved. Its head was tilted now. A slight, unnatural angle, as if it were listening to the radio interference too. I took another slow step back, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do not make another sound." But the radio popped again, this time sharper, like someone outside was intercepting the channel. And then, just like at Ridgeview, my own name crackled through the speaker in a distorted, broken tone. Lex, Come inside." My mouth dried instantly. The voice wasn't one I recognized. Not Maddox. Not Dana. Not any ranger I'd ever met. But it was a voice that had practiced speaking. A voice learning how to mimic conversational tone. A voice trying to sound like it belonged on a radio. My pulse hammered. I shut the radio off immediately. When I lifted my eyes, the silhouette had taken one step forward. Slow. Deliberate. Almost curious. I didn't think. I moved. I grabbed the lip of the cabin foundation and ripped at the boards with my gloves, trying to pry loose anything that would create an opening. The man beneath the floor whispered frantically, "He's coming. He hears wood. He always hears wood." I ignored him and kept pulling. 2 boards snapped free, sending mud spilling onto the dirt. A hand shot out through the gap, thin, shaking, fingernails torn to shreds. "Please," he begged, "please get me out." I reached in and grabbed his wrist. "We need to move. Whenever he gets quiet, that's when he gets close." The boards above us creaked. I looked up. The silhouette was no longer near the window. It was at the door now, close enough for me to see the faint outline of its shoulders in the moonlight. I yanked the man upward with all my strength as he scrambled and clawed, mud falling in chunks as his chest cleared the opening. His breath hitched in pain as he squeezed through, skin scraping hard against the boards. I got him out and threw his arm over my shoulder just as the cabin door creaked. Not slammed, not flung, just creaked, like someone was opening it as quietly as possible. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. The man under the floor, now beside me, gasped like he'd been stabbed. "Run, run, 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 run," he sputtered in a shaking whisper. We staggered into the tree line, his weight nearly pulling me down with him. He limped badly. I dragged him. Behind us, the porch boards groaned under heavy, deliberate steps. No yelling, no threats. Just the sound of someone stepping down a porch like they'd done it 1,000 times. The man beside me kept mumbling through chattering teeth. "Don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. He loves when they fall." Branches whipped our faces as we pushed deeper into the forest. It was almost black under the canopy. I aimed for the service road, but in the scrambling panic, my right boot snagged on a root and I stumbled hard. The man I was helping fell with me and cried out. Behind us, the footsteps stopped. Dead still. He heard us fall. My blood felt like ice water. We both froze, barely breathing. I could hear him listening, not moving, just listening. And then, almost impossibly faint, the man beside me whispered, "He's smiling." I didn't dare turn. I didn't want to see it. I grabbed the survivor again and forced him to his feet. We moved faster than before, half running, half lurching. Every few seconds, I'd hear something behind us. A branch snapping under weight, a boot scraping dirt, breath through a nose, not running, just following, always the same distance away, like he knew exactly how far we could get. When we finally reached the dirt access road, the man beside me collapsed, not from injury. His legs simply gave out in a way I had never seen a grown man's legs give out. He curled into himself, shaking violently, whispering, "Don't go back, don't go back, don't go back." I keyed my backup radio, the one with emergency frequency only, and screamed for immediate units. My voice cracked, my throat hurt, but I didn't stop. For the first time all night, someone responded. "Copy. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. 12 minutes with that thing somewhere behind us." I dragged the man toward a clearing near the road where moonlight poured through the branches. I wanted visibility. I wanted to see him coming. I wanted to know how far away death was, but he never stepped into the light. He stayed at the edge of the trees, just out of reach, just barely visible, a shape. I watched him. He watched me. His stillness made my skin crawl. He didn't move, didn't try to run, didn't hide. He just waited. When the first ranger vehicle tore up the road, seconds later, sirens echoing into the mountains, the figure slipped backward into the woods without a single sound. Not fleeing, not panicking, retreating. Like a man who had done this for years. Like a man who knew exactly where to step, where not to step, where he could disappear. The rangers pulled me and the survivor into the truck. He kept his eyes glued to the tree line until the door slammed shut. And even then, he whispered one final time, voice hollow and dead. He doesn't kill them. He just takes them. And when they stop screaming, he digs the next one. The next morning, search teams found the cabin. The boards under the floor, the claw marks, the mud, the empty spaces where bodies had once stood upright in narrow pits. But the man, gone. Every ranger who worked there already knew what that meant. That's why they never repaired the cabin, why they never reclaimed the trail, why they let the woods around it grow thick and dangerous. They weren't avoiding the cabin. They were avoiding him. And now that I had heard his voice over my radio, and he had heard mine, every ranger made it clear. He never forgets the people who walk too close to his cabin. I was 33 the year they reassigned me to the backcountry sector of Sable Rock National Forest in northern Idaho, a place where the trees were tall enough to block cell towers and the trails were long enough that hikers disappeared more often than animals. The park was massive, hundreds of square miles of pine, granite, and utter silence, and rangers rotated sectors every month to avoid burnout. My new position meant I was now in charge of collecting data from old wildlife trail cameras scattered through the woods, most of them ancient units left over from a research initiative nobody funded anymore. They weren't connected to Wi-Fi, weren't upgraded, weren't even mounted properly. Half of them were nailed to trees at crooked angles from the 90s, but they still held SD cards, and the district insisted we catalog all wildlife movement, even if the footage was worthless. I didn't mind the job. Hiking alone for hours was the easiest part of ranger life. But when Ranger Boyd, the supervisor for that region, handed me the clipboard on my first day, he tapped a section of the map a few inches above a red-circled area and said, "When you get to camera 47, don't check it at night. Go during daytime only, and don't linger there." He didn't elaborate. He didn't look like a man who liked telling spooky stories either. Boyd was older, stoic, indifferent to drama. So when he gave that warning, something in my gut tightened. But I let it go. Rangers give warnings about everything. Bears, cougars, poachers, winter storms. It all blends together. I shrugged, threw the pack over my shoulder, and headed out for my first long retrieval route. The first few days were normal. Bland, even. Camera 32 showed a moose. Camera 28 showed 2 hikers making out. Camera 13 had a raccoon who was apparently having the best night of his life. Nothing unusual, nothing strange. Then came Camera 47. It was located far off trail on a ridge above a stream, reachable only by cutting through overgrown brush and old logging scars. The forest was quieter here. Not silent, but tension silent, the kind of quiet where you know something is watching, even if you can't see it. When I finally reached the camera, I understood immediately why Boyd warned me. The thing wasn't just crooked. It was deliberately repositioned, pointing away from the animal trail entirely, aimed instead toward an open clearing of dirt and pine needles. I thought maybe a bear knocked it sideways, but the angle was too perfect, too intentional, facing nothing, facing emptiness. I unlatched the rusted housing, pulled out the SD card, and froze for a moment. It was warm. Not body warm, but like someone had touched it not long ago. Cameras in the forest don't generate heat. Not these old ones. They're passive infrared sensors, with no internal heating whatsoever. I turned the card over in my fingers. There was a faint smudge on its surface. A thumbprint, maybe. Fresh enough. To smear. My brain filed it away as weird, but not important. That's what brains do when something doesn't make sense. They categorize it into boxes that don't fit. Back at my ranger cabin, a small single-room place with wooden walls and a tiny kitchenette. I loaded the SD cards into the park's old laptop and started cataloging the footage. What I saw on camera 47 made my skin prickle instantly. The first few clips were normal. An elk passing through, a coyote sniffing around, a few empty frames triggered by branches blowing. Then suddenly, around 2:14 a.m., 2 nights earlier, a human figure appeared, not walking, not moving normally, just standing. A man, at least 6 feet tall, wearing a dark jacket, feet slightly apart, facing directly at the camera, only 10 feet away. The footage was grainy, washed in that green-black night vision tint, but the posture was unmistakable. He wasn't doing anything, not approaching, not signaling, just standing there like he was waiting for the camera to react. Then the man slowly stepped forward, a single step. Just one, but perfectly centered in frame. His face was fogged by distance and darkness, but I could see the faint shape of a nose, cheekbones, short hair. Human. Completely human. He stood there another full minute before walking out of frame. I leaned back in my chair, goosebumps crawling over my arms. People wander past our cameras sometimes, sure, but nobody stands still like they're posing. Nobody approaches deliberately. Nobody acknowledges cameras this deep in the park. I scrolled to the next clip. My stomach dropped. It wasn't wildlife. It wasn't hikers. It wasn't the man either. It was me, sleeping. My face rounded pillow, blanket pulled to my shoulder, mouth slightly open, arm draped across my chest. I froze. The footage showed my cabin interior, my exact bed, my exact blankets, even the stupid road map hanging on my wall. But I had never installed any camera inside my cabin. The park didn't have indoor monitoring, and I had been alone for days. I stared at the timestamp. 2:47 a.m. The same night the man stood in front of camera 47. My head buzzed. I scrolled to the next clip. Another angle, closer this time. The camera was placed only 2 feet away from my face, close enough to see my eyelashes, close enough that if someone had leaned just an inch forward, their breath would have hit my cheek. The footage lasted 30 silent seconds. Me breathing, me turning slightly, me completely unaware. I felt nauseated. This wasn't a wildlife camera recording random images. This was someone taking the SD card from camera 47, entering my cabin, filming me while I slept, and then putting the SD card back into the forest camera the next morning, which meant they had access, physical access, real keys, or real skill. I scrolled further. Another file. This one longer. I opened it and nearly stopped breathing. It was me sleeping, again. But in this clip, the camera shook very slightly, like someone holding it in their hand. Then, at the 9-second mark, a shape appeared in the bottom right corner of the frame, the edge of a shoulder, covered in a dark jacket, the same jacket the man wore in the forest. He was standing beside my bed, inches from me, watching. For how long? My chest tightened. I pressed play again, eyes burning into the corner of the frame where his shoulder was. The clip ended before I saw more, but the message was clear. He was in my cabin. He was next to me, and he wanted me to know. I tore through the rest of the footage. Most of it was dark frames of my room. Some were angled from my doorway, some from behind my kitchen counter. In one clip, the camera pointed at my face, but halfway through, I heard a whisper. Just a faint sound, not loud, not clear, like someone testing their voice. I leaned closer, turned volume up, listened again. A tiny breath, then a word, barely formed, barely a whisper. Sleep. I slammed the laptop shut. I didn't move for almost a full minute. My ears rang, my pulse hammered, and something inside me screamed that I wasn't alone in the cabin. I forced myself to stand, scan the walls, check the windows, check under the bed, check the closet. Nothing. Completely empty. Nothing but the echo of that whispered word playing on repeat in my mind. Sleep. 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 I stared at the ceiling and only then noticed it. Something I had never paid attention to before. A square outline above the kitchenette. A wooden seam. A crawlspace door. I dragged the table under it, climbed up, and pressed a hand to the wood. Warm. not from the room's heat. Warm like someone had been touching it recently, or pushing on it, or lifting it. My heart pounded in my throat. I stood there on the table looking up at the crawlspace hatch, breathing as quietly as I could. Then from inside the ceiling, above my head, came the slow, deliberate sound of shifting weight. A knee, a hand, someone repositioning themselves carefully, someone who had been there. The entire time I watched the footage, and now they knew I'd found them. For a long moment, I didn't move. I stood on that table below the crawlspace hatch, with my hand pressed against the warm wood, listening to the soft, methodical shifting right above me. Not hurried, not startled. Whoever was up there wasn't scrambling to escape or hide. They were adjusting their weight, as calmly as if they'd been waiting for me to finally look up. I slowly lowered myself off the table, never breaking eye contact with the ceiling. Every breath I took sounded too loud. Every heartbeat felt like it shook the air. I backed away toward the door, but halfway there, the crawlspace latch gave a tiny metallic click. Just a test, like a finger lightly pulling, then releasing it. Not opening, just checking. Whoever was above me wanted to know whether I'd run or freeze. Forced myself to keep walking until I reached the door, unlocked it, and stepped outside into the cold night air. I didn't slam it. I didn't want to provoke him, so I simply pulled it shut behind me and backed away into the moonlit path. And then, the cabin floorboards inside gave a long, slow, heavy creak. He was moving now. I didn't run. Running in panic would get me killed. Instead, I moved toward the ranger truck as evenly as I could, radio shaking in my hand. "Base, this is Dawson. Someone is in my cabin. I repeat, there is an intruder in my cabin." Only static came back. The mountains blocked most frequencies at night, and my signal died the farther I stepped from the cabin. The porch boards inside creaked again, closer to the door this time. I pressed the emergency channel and shouted for any ranger in range. My voice broke. "Respond. Now." Nothing. I couldn't stay there. I dropped low, crouching as I moved to the back of the cabin so the windows wouldn't give away my position. I positioned myself behind the propane tank and listened. The door latch jiggled once. Slow, deliberate. He was checking whether I had locked it. Then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in nature. The kind that means someone is holding their breath to hear yours. I couldn't stay. I crawled away from the cabin, keeping to the shadows. I needed distance, space to think, time to figure out how this man had entered my home without me ever hearing him. I knew the crawlspace was part of it, but something deeper was wrong. Cameras inside the cabin meant he'd been entering for days, maybe weeks. I moved deeper into the trees until the cabin was out of sight. Only then did I hear it, leaves crunching softly behind me, slow, spaced-out steps. Not stalking, not chasing, just keeping pace, like he was trailing me, studying my reactions, learning how I moved. I crouched behind a fallen log and held my breath. My eyes adjusted to the moonlight, scanning the tree line. A faint outline shifted between two pines, too tall for an animal, too controlled for a scared hiker. I ducked lower, my heartbeat feeling like it echoed off the bark. Then something metallic clicked, soft, almost gentle. A camera lens. He was filming me. My skin crawled so violently I felt nauseous. The cameras in the cabin weren't the only ones. He had others, portable ones. Ones he could carry, ones he could use anywhere he pleased. I crawled backward through the brush until my jacket snagged on a branch. I forced it free and kept going until I reached a service road. It was barely visible in the dark, but it was a route. I stood up and started fast walking toward the emergency tower a mile up. Behind me, footsteps entered the road. Not running, not hiding, just walking at the exact same speed. I didn't dare turn. I kept my pace steady, my breathing controlled. The tower was ahead. I could see it faintly through the trees, the metal structure, rising above the forest like a skeleton. Then my radio crackled, soft static. Then a voice. My voice. "A little faster, Alex." I froze. It wasn't him mimicking me clumsily. It wasn't a recording from earlier. He was using audio taken from inside my cabin, actual files from his hidden cameras. He could replay me saying anything he had captured, which meant he wasn't just filming me, he was collecting me. The radio crackled again, and this time my own voice whispered, "Turn around." I dropped the radio on instinct. It shattered against a rock, the battery popping out. The footsteps behind me stopped. I didn't look, not yet. Not until I reached the tower. When I finally lunged through the clearing and ran up the stairs, I pulled the hatch shut behind me, locked it, slid a filing cabinet against it, then collapsed against the wall. My hand shook so violently, I could barely brace myself. The tower was a metal box high above the ground. No crawl space, no plumbing access, no vents wide enough for a human. For the first time in hours, I felt a thin thread of safety. I forced myself to breathe and looked around for the emergency beacon switch. It was on the far wall. I reached it, flipped the cover, and pressed the button. A red light blinked once, twice, then steady. Someone would see it. Someone would come. I just needed to wait. But then, something caught my eye near the metal grating at the far end of the tower floor. A small object. I crawled toward it and picked it up. An SD card. Fresh, clean, placed carefully. My stomach twisted. With shaking hands, I pulled out my field laptop, plugged the card in, and waited. Only one video file appeared. I clicked it. At first, the footage was nothing but darkness. Then a faint green image flickered in, the interior of the tower I was currently in. The same walls, the same metal hatch, the same filing cabinet I'd pushed in front of the door. This was filmed earlier, hours, days. I didn't know. But then the camera moved, shifting slightly, like whoever was holding it was repositioning. The lens panned slowly across the room until it centered on the hatch, the one I had just locked. And then, the camera tilted upward, toward the ceiling, footsteps overhead. Not on the stairway, not on the hatch, on the metal roof of the tower. My breath left my chest. He was above me. I looked up at the ceiling panel, faint moonlight seeping through the seams. The metal flexed slightly, just a tiny bow in the surface, as weight pressed on it from above. Not heavy enough to break it, just enough to show me he was there. A shadow moved across the panel overhead. Slow, controlled, patient. Then a single fingertip tapped lightly against the roof. Once, twice, 3 times, as if to say, "You're not safe here either." The metal creaked as the weight shifted again, moving toward the far corner. I crawled back against the wall, staring upward, every muscle locked in place. The emergency beacon flashed red, but I couldn't take my eyes off the ceiling. Then the noise stopped. Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. I didn't know if he was still up there, or if he'd climbed down the far side, or if he was waiting under the stairs now. All I knew was that someone who knew every inch of the forest, every blind spot in the camera network, every weakness of every ranger cabin, had spent weeks watching me sleep, studying my schedule, recording my voice, and now had me cornered in the only place I thought I was safe. And then, finally, I heard engines in the distance, ranger trucks tearing down the service road toward the tower, radios crackling, doors slamming. But when they reached me, there were no footprints on the stairs, no marks on the ladder, no disturbance on the roof. Nothing. Only one thing was found. Another SD card placed neatly on the bottom step. No dirt, no scratches. Fresh. Inside, it was a single video file. The final clip showed something I will never forget. Me, standing at the top of the tower stairs earlier tonight, reaching for the hatch. And right behind me, barely visible in the corner of the frame, a man in a dark jacket stepping silently behind the wall, waiting for me to enter. He had been with me the whole time. He never left the tower. He only moved when I wasn't looking. And the last frame of the video, before it cut to black, was him raising the camera to his eye. His mouth curved in a faint, terrible smile, as if to say, "This footage is just the beginning." I was 30 when I took the winter assignment at Pine Gulch National Forest, a remote park in northern Montana that didn't get many visitors outside the summer months. The place transformed in winter. Deep snow muffled the world into a cold, glassy silence, and the tall lodgepole pines bent under the weight of ice until they creaked like old hulls of sinking ships. Most rangers hated winter duty because the isolation got inside your bones, but I preferred it. Quiet meant fewer emergencies, fewer lost hikers, fewer things that spiraled out of control. But that year, everything spiraled. The first missing hiker report came in late November. A 23-year-old guy named Brandon Pierce, who was supposedly experienced with snowshoeing. When we found the trail where he disappeared, something odd immediately stood out. The snow was perfectly undisturbed except for 2 sets of boot prints, one set matching Brandon's shoe size, the other set matching nothing. The second prints were a perfect copy of his. Same exact pattern, same length, same width, same depth, as if 2 people were wearing the exact same boots. At first, we assumed Brandon had doubled back on his own tracks for some reason. But that theory fell apart when we followed the trail and noticed something impossible. 2 sets of footprints walked side by side. The strides matched perfectly. Both sets turned the same direction, lifted the same way, angled the same amount. Not once did they cross. No human walks exactly in sync with another, not unless they're trained or trying extremely hard. Even then, footprints differ slightly. One person walks heavier on one foot. One takes slightly longer strides. But these weren't different people. These prints mirrored Brandon too perfectly, like someone had literally copied him. The prints went on until they abruptly ended at an open clearing. Just ended. No sign of struggle, no drag marks, no broken tree limbs, no blood. Just 2 sets of perfect parallel prints leading to nothing. That was the first case. The second happened 6 days later. A woman named Linda Gonzalez went missing while doing a short loop near Birch Pass. Same pattern. 2 sets of footprints, hers, and an identical pair next to hers. Only hers were slightly smaller, so the second set was smaller too. Perfectly matched. Whoever, or whatever, was walking next to her was using the exact same boot type, size, weight distribution, pace, and stride. It was too precise to be natural. We filed both into the unexplained category and kept quiet. Parks don't like panic, but word travels fast in small rural areas. Hikers began avoiding the forest. The sheriff's department blamed missteps and wild animal predation, though none of the bodies were found, and every ranger started feeling something we never felt before. We weren't alone out there. Someone else was on the trails, someone who watched people long enough to imitate them. The third disappearance hit me hardest. The missing person was a fellow ranger, Evan Mallory. He went missing during a routine patrol. This time, when we reached the location his GPS last pinged, the snow told a story I wish I could blot from my memory. 2 sets of footprints again. Evan's, size 10.5, and next to them, an identical pair. But this time we found something new. We found a third set trailing behind those 2. Not close enough to be walking together. Not far enough to be unconnected. Someone had been shadowing Evan and the imitator, but the third set stopped abruptly and disappeared in the trees, like the person stepped off the trail, or was lifted. For the next week, every ranger was on edge. We traveled in pairs. We checked our backs every few minutes. We inspected every boot in the district in case someone was playing a prank, which would have been the sickest prank imaginable. Nothing. Then came the day I realized it wasn't random. It was organized. It was targeted. It was personal. On December 18th, right after a heavy snowfall, I stepped out of my cabin to find something outside the door. 2 sets of footprints. One set was mine. Perfectly mine. Identical tread. Identical size. Identical pressure pattern from where I rolled slightly on my right foot due to an old ankle injury. And right next to them, a second set that matched mine so perfectly I felt my chest tighten. But the part that made my stomach twist, The prints didn't lead to my cabin. They led from it. Someone had walked away, pretending to be me. I crouched beside the prints, inspecting them up close. My boots had a tiny defect from where a screw lodged in the tread during a work project 2 months earlier. It left a distinctive small gouge in the rubber. I checked the fake prints. The gouge was there, exactly the same. Someone had molded or recreated a perfect copy of my boot soles. Every flaw, every scrape, every compression mark. Someone had been studying my footsteps, watching where I walked, tracing my daily routine, mapping how much weight I put on my heels versus toes, learning my pace, my pressure, my rhythm. And when I followed the fake prints, they led down the path, then into the tree line, then behind the maintenance shed, then to the edge of the forest, then deeper and deeper, until the prints stopped at a tree stump, not faded, not blown away, stopped, like the person wearing them simply stepped into the air and vanished. I looked around the forest, heart pounding, silence, snow drifting, pine branches hanging still, yet the sense of being watched pressed on me so heavily, it felt like someone was leaning over my shoulder. I returned to the cabin with every nerve buzzing. Inside on my table was something new, something I knew I didn't leave there, an envelope. Inside it, a single piece of folded paper. No writing, no marks. Just 2 things, a photograph and a boot sole impression. The photograph was of me walking the Northern Ridge Trail 3 days earlier. I was alone. No one should have been close. But the photo was taken from above, like someone perched in a tree or on a cliff ledge. The boot impression? It wasn't one I recognized. It was pressed into the paper. Heavy tread, deep, precise, size 10.5. Mine, but not mine. Underneath it, lightly smudged in graphite, as if someone traced it by hand, were the words, "Next, I'll teach you how you walk." And then, faintly below that, "After that, I'll teach you how you breathe." I stood in my cabin, heart hammering, staring at the message, realizing something that made the blood drain from my face. The first 3 victims went missing right after someone duplicated their footprints. That meant someone had already begun duplicating mine, which meant I wasn't the hunter anymore. I wasn't the ranger. I was next. I didn't sleep the night I found the duplicate of my footprint. I just sat at the small wooden table in my cabin with the envelope open in front of me. The pale boot impression, staring back like a threat carved in ice. Outside, the snow fell quietly, collecting along the windowsill in thin white ridges. My cabin's heater clicked on and off every few minutes. Each time it did, the sudden silence afterward made me feel like someone was standing just outside the door, watching, listening, waiting. At around 3:40 a.m., I realized something else, something that made my skin crawl. Whoever left that envelope inside my cabin had to walk inside, place it on the table, and leave without leaving a single footprint inside the cabin. They also didn't leave any footprints leading to the door, only from the cabin, meaning they entered from another angle, the back window, the chimney, the attic crawl space, or worse, the underground maintenance duct no one used anymore. I checked every inch of the cabin, flashlight trembling in my hand. No footprints, no scuffs, no disturbed snow, no fingerprints, nothing. The person who had copied my boots was either extremely disciplined or extremely familiar with how rangers investigate. By dawn, my nerves were fried, so I radioed Ranger Boyd and told him everything. I expected disbelief or dismissal, but he didn't react. He didn't say I was imagining things. He didn't ask me to calm down. Instead, his voice went quiet. "You need to stay inside your cabin. Do not follow any footprints today. Do not engage." That froze me. "Boyd, what do you know?" But he didn't answer. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me he knew more than he was allowed to say. Before I could press him again, his radio cut to static. That wasn't normal. Our radios didn't drop out that close to headquarters. Something was interfering, or someone. I shoved on my coat and went outside despite Boyd's warning. The snow was fresh, and untouched. The duplicate footprints from last night had already been filled in by the storm. The forest looked smooth and clean again, like nothing had happened. But the cold air smelled different, sharper, stiller, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I walked around the cabin perimeter, looking for any entry point. On the backside, half buried in snow and hidden behind firewood, I found it. A narrow maintenance hatch screwed into the foundation, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. The screws were cold, but loose, like someone had removed and reattached them recently. I crouched down, heart pounding, and shined my flashlight into the gap. It led into a tight underground crawl space that connected multiple ranger cabins through an old utility duct system. The ducts were supposed to be sealed after a remodel 15 years ago, but clearly someone had kept access. Someone had been traveling beneath us, watching, listening, mapping our routes. I bolted upright when I heard a soft crunch in the snow. Footsteps. Not approaching, not walking away, just standing somewhere behind me, still enough that snowflakes settled on the silhouette without sliding off. I turned slowly. Nothing. But farther along the tree line, a faint line of prints appeared in the fresh snow, not mine, not anyone from the ranger station, and not the duplicated prints either. These were different. Wider, deep, precise, and they didn't lead to the trees. They simply emerged from them, the same way the prints at the stump had ended. Someone wore specialized rubber overboots, the kind designed to mask tread pattern and create identical impressions to a mold. And these particular prints were new, heavier, more deliberate. He'd switched boots. He had a new pair, maybe a new identity. I took a few cautious steps forward, scanning every tree trunk, every branch, every dark gap where someone could hide. The prints traveled about 20 feet, then abruptly changed direction, turning toward my cabin. Not from the night before, from just minutes ago. He'd approached my cabin while I was inside. He'd stood outside the window, watching. I followed the prints until they suddenly split, like whoever made them took one step and then duplicated it. 2 identical prints side by side, same depth, same angle, same weight. Then 2 sets again, then 3, then back to 1. He was experimenting with weight distribution, learning how heavy I walked, how hard my boots pressed the snow, how my gait changed depending on incline. The bastard was practicing copying me in real time. A cold panic crawled up my spine. If he learned me perfectly, if he matched my gait and stride exactly, if he replicated my boot flaws and weight shift, then when he walked behind someone else, it would look like I was the one with them, just like the other victims. My heart hammered so loud I barely noticed the faint hum behind me, the sound of a distant motor, a snowmobile coming fast. I turned and saw headlights cutting through the trees. Ranger Boyd. He skidded to a stop meters away and waved at me urgently. "Get in, now." I didn't argue. I climbed on the back, and he punched the accelerator. The wind blasted my face as we tore through the forest, snow spraying into the air. I shouted over the engine, "Tell me what's going on." Boyd didn't answer for a long time. Not until the cabin was far behind us, and we were deep into the northern sector, miles from any trail. Finally, he slowed the snowmobile to a stop in a clearing surrounded by dense pine. He kept his helmet on when he said, "You weren't the first one he tried to copy." Heat drained from my body despite the cold. "He," I repeated. Boyd nodded. "We call him the Echo. We don't use his name because we don't know it. He's been around for at least 8 winters, maybe more. He studies people, watches how they move, learns their footprints, learns how to walk beside them without making sound, learns how to match their stride so perfectly that search teams think 2 identical sets belong to the same person." My stomach twisted. The missing hikers, he walked beside them, and when they vanished, it looked like they just walked away alone. I swallowed hard. And the second set of prints, he made molds, exact molds. He has dozens of pairs, hundreds maybe, all crafted from stolen boots. He steals them from trailheads, campsites, abandoned vehicles. A sickening realization hit me. But why copy my boots now? Boyd finally removed his helmet. His eyes were terrified. Because out of every ranger on staff, you walk the farthest alone. Before I could respond, a faint crunch echoed through the clearing. Boyd snapped his head up. His eyes widened. Another crunch. Closer. Deliberate. Measured. We both turned to the tree line. Two identical sets of footprints were appearing in the snow, side by side. But there was no one visible making them. Not at first. Then a tall figure stepped out from behind a tree trunk, slowly emerging from shadow. He wore a dark winter coat, a hood, rubber over boots, the kind you use to hide prints. But strapped around his actual boots, tight and exact, was something worse. Perfect molds of my own boot soles. Same gouge, same scuff, same worn patch on the left heel. And the man walked with my exact stride, my exact weight shift, my exact cadence. Every step he took was a mirror, a second version of me. He stopped 20 feet away, cocked his head slightly, then took one slow, heavy step forward. And the snow printed my tread pattern. Perfectly. He stepped again. My stride, my weight, my identity. Boyd's breath shook. Don't move. Don't move. But the man began walking faster, deliberate, identical, prints slamming into the snow with a precision that made my stomach churn. Not toward Boyd, not toward the trees, toward me. He wasn't copying anymore. He was replacing. Boyd grabbed my arm, desperate. Run. But it was too late. The echo took one more perfect step, leaving one perfect copy of my footprint. Then another, and then he whispered, using my voice, my tone, my cadence. I'll finish learning you by tonight. I was 34 when I transferred to the northern district of Shadow Ridge National Park, a place so large and underfunded that most of its old buildings were used more for storage than active operations. Rangers rotated through every 3 months to avoid burnout, but most didn't make it past one rotation. People quit without giving notice. Some left in the middle of their shift. A few vanished without a trace. The official explanation was always the same. Rugged terrain, winter risk, poor communication range. But the rangers who stayed long enough learned to keep their heads down and their questions to themselves. On my first week, I helped Ranger Dalton clear out an old supply shed that hadn't been opened in years. Snow had sealed the door to the frame, and it took us 10 minutes just to push it open far enough to squeeze inside. The place smelled like rot and metal, wet rope, damp paper, mold creeping along the walls like veins. Dalton told me to grab anything salvageable while he checked the radio equipment. I sifted through boxes of old uniforms, flare guns with expired ammo, cracked boots, and outdated maps. Then, buried beneath a pile of rusted lanterns, I found a small black notebook. No markings, no lock, just ordinary, except for the fact it was wrapped in a zippered plastic bag, like someone wanted it protected. I opened it. Every page was filled with names, Rangers' names. Some I recognized from old rosters, some I didn't. Next to each name was a date. Some were marked found, others missing, and others just blank. At first I thought it was some kind of memorial log, but something felt wrong. The dates next to the missing names weren't the dates they vanished. They were dates days or weeks before their disappearances. Like someone had predicted it. I kept flipping. 3 pages in, I saw a name that made my stomach twist. Mallory. Evan. That was the name of a ranger who'd gone missing 3 years before I transferred. I remembered the briefing. Evan was last seen heading out to repair a weather station. They found his snowmobile abandoned with the seat still warm, but no tracks leading away. His date in the notebook was 4 days before the incident. Dalton poked his head over my shoulder, and his face drained of color. He snatched the notebook away like it was radioactive. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, voice low. I pointed to the box. He didn't waste a second. He closed the notebook, shoved it inside his jacket, and said, "Don't mention this. to anyone, not even to me. Then he walked out of the shed like someone had just whispered his death date into his ear. But I'm not the type who drops something once it starts gnawing at me. Over the next few days, I tried to ask subtle questions. Who worked here 10 years ago? Why the park kept losing rangers? Why the Northern District had the highest turnover? Nobody answered directly. Some pretended they didn't hear me. Others changed the topic. One ranger, Harper, looked me square in the eyes and said, "If you want to keep your job, don't dig." His face was pale, his voice thin, like he wasn't warning me for policy reasons. He was warning me like a man who had buried too many co-workers. That night, I lay in my cabin staring at the ceiling, thinking about the notebook. Why the secrecy? Why would someone predict disappearances? Who was writing those names? And most importantly, how accurate was it? By the third night, curiosity won. I slipped on my jacket and walked through the snow toward Dalton's cabin. The wind cut hard, turning the world into a white roar. His cabin window glowed faintly, but when I knocked, no one answered. I tried the door. It cracked open. The inside was dark except for a lantern on the table. I called his name twice. Nothing. But I saw the notebook, sitting exactly where he'd left it. I hesitated only a second before stepping inside. This time, I opened to the newer pages. These weren't names from years ago. These were active rangers, people I'd spoken to this week. Price, December 3rd. Harper, December 9th. Dalton, December 14th. All dates within days of each other. My breath caught. Today was December 13th. Dalton's date was tomorrow. My pulse hammered as I flipped to the next page. That's when I saw my name. Bennett, December 18th. 5 days from now. My fingers trembled. My throat dried. I kept staring, hoping the ink would shift, or blur, or rearrange into something less horrifying. But it didn't. Dalton's voice suddenly broke the silence behind me. "I told you not to look." I spun around, startled. He stood in the doorway, snow on his boots, face pale with something between anger and grief. "You shouldn't have seen your name," he said quietly. "Makes it harder." "Harder for what?" I snapped. But the shake in my voice ruined the bite. Dalton walked past me, grabbed the notebook, and slammed it shut. "This isn't a prophecy. It's not a curse. It's a schedule." He turned his gaze toward the window, as if checking for something watching us. "This park has a problem. A human one. A long-standing one. And the fewer people who know how it works, the longer the rest of us survive." I felt sick. Someone's killing rangers. Dalton didn't deny it. He didn't blink. He didn't even look at me when he said, "They don't kill us. They make us disappear." The wind howled against the cabin walls, rattling the window panes. I stepped back. "Who is making the list?" Dalton breathed out slowly. "Whoever runs this. Whoever benefits. Whoever needs certain rangers gone." His voice lowered into a whisper. "We don't talk about them. We don't look for them. We don't even acknowledge they exist. But how would they know where we'll be, when we'll be alone?" Dalton looked at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen. "Because they're the ones who assign our patrols. They decide our shifts. They plan our routes. They know everything about us." A cold realization seeped into my bones. This wasn't a killer hunting us. It was someone above us. Someone within the system. Someone we trusted. I staggered back a step, the world tilting slightly. Dalton's voice softened. "Listen to me. If you want a chance, any chance, you need to avoid your route on the 17th. Call in sick. Break your leg. I don't care. Just don't go where they expect you." His voice trembled. "I'll try the same tomorrow." I nodded slowly, fear clamping around my ribs. I opened the cabin door, cold wind rushing in like a slap. Dalton called out behind me. "Bennett, don't tell anyone else. If they think you know your date, they'll move it up." Those words shoved me out of the cabin in a daze. I walked back through the snow, hands numb, mind spinning, the weight of the notebook sitting on my soul like a boulder. When I reached my own cabin, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and pressed my back against the wall. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My name was on a goddamn disappearance schedule. I had 5 days, and tomorrow Dalton had one. I sat there in the dark until morning came, and when sunlight finally bled through the window, my radio crackled with static. Then a voice came through. A calm, detached voice from HQ. "Ranger Bennett, be advised. Dalton never reported for patrol this morning." My heart stopped. "Last known location was his cabin," the voice continued. "He is officially listed as missing." I sank to the floor, cold sweat dripping down my spine, because I knew exactly what that meant. They hadn't waited until his date. They moved it up, which meant they could do the same to me. And the notebook's final warning echoed in my skull like a death sentence. "You're not escaping your date. Your date is escaping you." I didn't move for a long time after the radio call. I just sat on the cabin floor with my back against the wall, staring at the opposite corner as if Dalton might somehow walk in and laugh at the whole thing. But the silence settled heavier and heavier, and I knew the truth. Dalton was gone. Taken. Erased. Whatever force controlled that notebook didn't wait, didn't negotiate, didn't give second chances. They moved his date up the moment they sensed he knew, which meant my 5 days wasn't 5 days anymore. It could be 5 hours, 5 minutes, or already over. I stood, heart hammering, and checked every lock in the cabin, then every window, then every vent, but none of it mattered. Dalton said the ones behind this didn't break in. They didn't force their way through doors. They didn't leave evidence. They moved around the park like they belonged there, because they did. They were inside the system, embedded deep enough that they controlled routes, radios, assignments. They decided where every ranger would be, and exactly when they'd be alone long enough to vanish without suspicion. I paced the cabin for half an hour before finally grabbing my keys. I had one thought in my head: leave the forest. Right now. Don't wait for orders. Don't call HQ. Just go. I grabbed my backpack and stepped outside into the morning cold, but stopped dead. Someone had cleared the snow in a perfect 6-foot circle in front of my cabin. In the center of the cleared patch lay a laminated page, weighted by a stone. My blood ran cold. I knelt down slowly, breath fogging in the icy air, and turned it over. It was a page from the notebook, ripped cleanly from the binding. At the top was my name, Bennett. Below it, something had changed. My date wasn't 5 days away anymore. It was blank. Just an empty line, a space, a warning. They were telling me, we can take you whenever we want. The edges of my vision blurred. I spun around, scanning the tree line, feeling the forest closing in on me. Every dark branch looked like a figure. Every shadow twitched in my peripheral vision. I stepped backward into the cabin and locked the door again, realizing escape wasn't an option. Not through roads they controlled. Not through routes they assigned. They knew exactly where I would go, because they were the ones who trained me to go there. The next hours were a blur of panic, pacing, and desperately trying to think my way out. At noon, the radio crackled again. "Bennett, update required. Confirm your patrol route for today." It was the same calm voice from HQ, the same one who had delivered Dalton's disappearance like reading a grocery list. I didn't answer. The radio crackled again, more insistent. "Ranger Bennett, confirm." I didn't move. Failure to respond will be logged. Still, I said nothing. The radio gave a single sharp pop, and then fell dead silent. Not static, not malfunction, silence. Someone had turned the channel off remotely. Someone who controlled the system down to the smallest switch. That's when I heard the crunch outside. Not footsteps on snow. Something heavier, something dragging. I froze. Another sound followed. A soft thud against the cabin wall. Deliberate, testing. Then another. This time, on the opposite side. Whoever was outside was circling the cabin slowly, as if tracing the perimeter. I dropped low, crawling away from the window, hearing the thudding grow closer, more confident. My mind raced. Was it one person? Two? More? Then something more chilling. A quiet rhythmic tapping on the glass. Fingernails. Slow. Measured. Not trying to break in. Just letting me know they were there. I crawled to the back bedroom. shut the door quietly, and pressed my ear to the floor. I needed to know if they were under me. Dalton said the disappearances didn't require force. The ones behind the list moved people the way a hand moves pieces across a board. They didn't rush. They didn't panic. They simply waited until the ranger stepped exactly where they wanted him. And I had no idea where that spot was. I stayed in that bedroom for hours, barely breathing, barely blinking. Every few minutes, the tapping changed places, moving from window to wall, from wall to roof, from roof to porch. Always gentle, always controlled. If they were trying to break in, I could have fought back. But this psychological suffocation, this was worse. They were letting me know escape didn't matter. Time didn't matter. All that mattered was that I knew they were close. Around sunset, the tapping stopped. The forest went dead silent. No wind, no creaking, no movement. That was somehow worse. I stayed awake deep into the night, clutching my knife, staring at the door. Eventually, sheer exhaustion pulled me under. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I remembered waking. Cold, freezing cold. My cheek was pressed against wood. My arm was pinned awkwardly beneath me. I blinked slowly, the world blurry and dark. My cabin ceiling wasn't above me. My walls weren't around me. Instead, I saw boards. Gaps between them. Dirt below me. A crawl space. I wasn't in my cabin anymore. Someone had moved me. Quietly. Effortlessly. Without waking me. My pulse roared in my ears. I tried to sit up, but hit my head. The space was too cramped. My breath fogged in the darkness. I turned my head and saw something beside me. A stack of laminated pages. Dozens, maybe hundreds. All covered in names and dates. All crossed out. My fingers shook as I pulled the top page closer. It was a new sheet. Blank. Waiting to be filled. And next to it lay a black pen. A message was written at the top in precise handwriting. You've seen the list, so now you help maintain it. I wanted to scream, but the crawl space swallowed sound. I crawled inch by inch toward the other side, hoping for an exit. Instead, I reached a wooden grate. Through it, I saw boots. Ranger boots. Standing still. Waiting. My boots. My exact tread pattern. They'd taken my boots off me while I slept. And someone else was wearing them now. The figure shifted slightly, then crouched, a face lowered into view through the grate. Not masked, not hooded. Just an ordinary ranger face I recognized from morning briefings. He smiled faintly as he whispered. Dalton tried to run. You won't. You're smarter than him. I shook my head violently, backing away, hitting the wooden wall behind me, breath coming in ragged gasps. The man continued. Everyone understands eventually. The forest needs balance. Rangers disappear so new ones can come. You're part of the system now, and systems must be maintained. He reached through the grate and slid the notebook pages toward me. Your date stays blank until you finish writing the next two. Tears blurred my vision. My chest tightened. This wasn't a killer. This wasn't a stalker. This was an institution, a cycle, a machine that had been running for decades, powered by ranger after ranger forced into silence. I whispered, I won't do it. He smiled wider. Bennett, you already did. He held up the laminated page I hadn't seen before. My handwriting. My signature. A name I had spoken once in passing. A ranger scheduled to patrol tomorrow. Harper, December 16th. My stomach twisted. My vision swam. He stood, boots crunching softly above me. We'll come back when you're ready. Then the grate closed. Footsteps faded. And in that suffocating dark, surrounded by the names of the dead, I realized the ending wasn't death. It was becoming part of the list. It was becoming the one who filled it. It was disappearing from the surface of the forest and becoming another silent hand that erased the next person. Dalton wasn't taken because he resisted. He was taken because he wouldn't write. I pressed my forehead to the cold earth and finally understood the truth. The only way out is to pull someone else in. And the forest outside waited patiently, quietly, eternally. for the next name. I was halfway through my terrible station coffee when the morning briefing took a turn I still can't wrap my head around. The room felt strange from the moment we walked in. No chatter, no jokes, no energy. Everyone sat stiff in their seats, jackets still zipped, steam rising from their damp boots as if nobody had warmed up yet. At 5:14 a.m., the overhead speaker popped and HQ cut in with an urgent tone none of us had ever heard before. The projector flickered on, and instead of trail conditions or hazard maps, a single portrait photograph filled the screen. My photograph. Ranger Thomas Hollis, age 32, listed as missing with a timestamp showing my last known location as Sector 12 at 3:10 p.m. yesterday. I blinked, waiting for someone to laugh or explain the mistake, but instead the entire room turned to stare at me all at once. I raised my hand slowly, half smiling. "I'm right here." Nobody smiled back. HQ kept talking like I hadn't said anything, calmly explaining I had failed to report, and that body cam footage confirmed my disappearance. My stomach tightened into a knot. I stood, telling them there had to be a mistake, that I'd never left my cabin yesterday, but HQ interrupted with a tone that made every hair on my arms rise. "According to our logs, you never returned." Ranger Sutton whispered that she'd seen my truck leaving around 2, and that I'd waved. I told her she was remembering wrong. Ranger Patel said he heard my radio check-in from Sector 12. I said he didn't. The air felt like thick static, buzzing with confusion and disbelief, and then HQ announced the footage upload. The video began, and the world tilted. It was me, my uniform, my stride, my muttered breathing into the mic, even the way I pushed the body cam strap off my collarbone because it always dug in. But I knew without a doubt, it wasn't me. The footage showed me walking down the snowy trail, my voice reporting in calm, routine tones. I kept saying, "That's not me." But my voice on the screen drowned mine out. I watched myself turn down a narrow bend, snow thickened, wind roared, and then the camera jerked wildly, as if something yanked me off balance. My voice, my exact voice, screamed in a way I've never screamed in my life, panicked, raw, and desperate. The camera spun through snow and branches before landing sideways on the ground. The last frame froze on a timestamp, 3:10 p.m. yesterday. A silence heavier than snowfall filled the room. Finally, HQ spoke again, announcing my status as officially missing and ordering search teams to prepare. I slammed the table so hard the room shook, yelling that I was right there, alive, breathing, talking, but the response was terrifyingly calm. The evidence disagrees. When the meeting ended, I sprinted to the evidence room demanding the physical body cam. Officer Marrow didn't even meet my eyes, as he said HQ had already transferred it elsewhere. Transferred where? No answer. I felt the walls press in around me. Something was wrong. Deeply, deliberately wrong. I walked out the back exit and made a beeline across the snow toward my cabin, disobeying direct orders, because suddenly I didn't trust the station, didn't trust the cameras, didn't trust anything connected to HQ. I shoved through my cabin door and froze. Nothing was disturbed, except for a wet ranger jacket draped over my chair. My jacket, dripping melted snow onto the floor. But I hadn't left my cabin yesterday. I knelt beside it with numb fingers and checked the pockets. Inside was a folded map of Sector 12 with 2 routes marked. One labeled Hollis, 3:10 p.m. in red, and a second one in blue. Hollis, 5:40 p.m. 2 separate times, 2 separate disappearances, 2 separate me's. My vision blurred as a cold wave rolled up my spine. Then I saw the footprints. Outside my door, leading directly to my cabin, deep, clear, unmistakable, my tread pattern, my weight distribution, my exact stride. But I hadn't walked there. They came from the woods, not from the station, from the trees, and they stopped right at my door like someone had walked me home. I backed into the center of the cabin, heart hammering so hard my vision shook. My radio crackled on the desk. No static, no distortion, just a single breath. My breath. Then a voice that matched mine perfectly whispered through the speaker, "Hollis, please open the door." I staggered backward until my shoulders hit the wall. Whoever was outside wasn't just pretending to be me. They weren't just imitating. Someone was wearing my identity like a uniform, like a skin they'd studied, copied, perfected. They had walked where I should have walked, spoken how I supposedly spoke, screamed the way they wanted me to scream. The fake disappearance wasn't a mistake. This was a setup, a replacement. And now, the replacement was standing on the other side of my door, waiting for the real me to make the final move. I didn't open the door. I stood there shaking, staring at the handle as if it might turn on its own. The voice on the radio stopped speaking, but the cabin felt fuller, heavier, as if the air itself was listening. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but where? HQ had already declared me missing. The video had already replaced me. The thing standing outside had already walked in my boots. If I died right now, the park wouldn't investigate. They'd just assume the disappearance was already logged. I backed slowly away from the door, every board creaking under my feet, feeling like a broadcast of my location. I considered slipping out the back window. But if whoever this was knew my roots, my stride, my voice, then they already knew about the window too. My cabin wasn't a home anymore. It was a layout they had studied. It was a trap built out of a place that used to feel safe. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't the voice. Outside, it was HQ, calm and cold as always, asking me to report to the station immediately for verification procedures. I didn't respond. If I spoke, my voice would go on the record, and if the imposter outside duplicated it again, HQ wouldn't be able to tell us apart. Maybe they already couldn't. Maybe they were helping him, or maybe they didn't even realize they were being manipulated. My mind spun in circles with possibilities that made me sick. I turned off the radio and reached for my jacket before remembering the real horror. My jacket was still wet, still dripping on the chair. The one they used was indistinguishable from mine. For all I knew, the one hanging on the chair wasn't mine at all. I grabbed my old field coat from under the bed instead, zipped it with trembling fingers, and moved toward the small crawlspace hatch in the corner, the one no one ever used. If I had any chance of leaving without being tracked, it would have to be a way the imposter hadn't walked yet. I pulled the hatch open as quietly as possible, but the ancient hinges still groaned softly. Dust billowed out in a choking cloud. Below lay a narrow subfloor filled with old boards, abandoned wiring, and cold soil. I climbed down, sliding on my stomach as the hatch lowered above me, trying to pull it shut without making noise. Just before it closed, I heard footsteps outside, soft, slow, deliberate. They weren't knocking this time. They were walking around my cabin, circling it with the kind of confidence someone only has when they think they're already inside your life. The hatch clicked shut just as a shadow stopped above it. Dust rained down onto my face. Someone was standing directly on top of me. I lay completely still, barely breathing, listening to the faint wood creak. Then the imposter's voice, my own voice, spoke right above me. "I know you're in there." My chest tightened until I thought my ribs would crack. He wasn't guessing, he was certain. He knew exactly where I'd gone. I crawled forward in the shallow dirt, scraping my elbows across stone and splinters, moving toward the far wall where the foundation thinned. I felt the vibrations of footsteps following me above, tracing my exact route. When I stopped, they stopped. When I crawled again, they moved in sync. It was like being hunted by my own shadow. The crawl space narrowed until I had to squeeze through sideways. Cobwebs clung to my face. My breath was loud in the small space, but the footsteps were louder. Whoever was above me was heavier than me, or just walking with more force, as if they wanted me to hear. When I reached the far end, I pressed my shoulder against a loose board in the foundation and pushed. Dirt shifted outside. The board gave way. Cold winter air rushed in, stinging my lungs. I shoved myself through and rolled into a patch of dead brush behind the cabin. The sky was darkening fast, streaked with orange fading into purple. I forced myself to crawl deeper into the brush, keeping low. The cabin door opened behind me. He stepped out. My exact height. My exact posture. My exact uniform. The imposter walked onto the snow with my boot impressions matching perfectly, scanning the trees as if he knew every direction I might run. Every movement was practiced, rehearsed, perfected, until not even I could see a difference. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't need one. He didn't even look like me. He moved like me. Whoever had studied me had done it long enough that they must have logged months of my patterns. How I turn my head when I hear a branch crack. How I stand when I'm alert. How I check the weight of my boots after fresh snow. Watching him move felt like watching a recording of myself. Except the recording was breathing. He walked toward the tree line, pausing only once to tilt his head like he sensed me nearby. My lungs froze. I didn't blink. After a long moment, he continued down the path toward the station. My path. He was going to the others. He was going to walk into that room with my face, my voice, my footsteps, my radio ID, and they would believe him. Why wouldn't they? He had already convinced HQ I'd been dragged away screaming. Now he would convince them I had been found, or cleared, or reassigned, or whatever story he needed to complete my replacement. I waited until he disappeared into the trees before, crawling out of the brush, every muscle trembling. If he returned and found my real footprints behind the cabin, I was done. I brushed snow over them until the ground looked untouched. Then I headed in the opposite direction from the station, deeper into the woods where no ranger ever patrolled. If HQ thought I was missing, and the imposter thought he'd replaced me, then my only advantage was being truly invisible. I walked with careful steps, deliberately altering my stride so my tread wouldn't match the fake data they'd built. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Snow muffled the world into a flat, hollow silence. Hours passed. My legs stiffened. The cold sank deep into my bones. I found a fallen log and sheltered behind it as night took the last of the light. I told myself I'd rest for a minute. Just 1 minute. But at some point, exhaustion stole me, and I drifted into a shallow, haunted sleep. I woke in the dark to the sound of someone walking, slow, deliberate, familiar. I held my breath. The footsteps matched mine. Exactly. Perfect tempo, perfect pressure, perfect rhythm. Then a voice whispered from the darkness. My voice. I found you. My heart stopped. Because he wasn't behind me. He wasn't ahead of me. He was whispering directly beside my ear in the darkness, close enough that I felt the breath. And I realized with an icy, final certainty that whoever had replaced me wasn't simply copying me anymore. He had finished learning me, and now he didn't need me at all. I'd been a ranger at Ironwood National Forest for almost 6 years before I ever heard the pattern. It wasn't written in any incident report or printed in any safety briefing. It wasn't something the senior rangers talked about openly. It lived in the quiet moments, passed between hushed voices in the gear room, traded only when a recruit stuck around long enough to see the real face of the forest. They all said the same thing. Every ranger who vanished reported seeing the same man in the woods in the days before they disappeared. I always thought it sounded like paranoia born from long winters in isolation. Rangers imagine shadows. Everyone knows that. But I should have paid attention to the details. 6'3", navy parka, no gloves, hands slightly open, never blinking, never speaking. Every ranger described him down to the smallest feature, like they were reading from the same script. Not one of them could explain how he got so close without being heard. Not one could explain why he never approached, never chased, never even reacted. He would just stand there, watching, quiet as snowfall. I didn't believe it until the investigation started. HQ sent an internal team after Ranger Mitchell vanished without a trace. They gathered every ranger still working the district into the main station one morning and interviewed us one by one. I watched ranger after ranger walk into the office, looking uneasy, and walk out looking pale. When my turn came, the woman leading the inquiry asked one question that made my skin tighten. "Ranger Hale, have you ever seen a man matching this description?" She slid the paper across the table. A rough sketch of a tall man in a parka, blank face, slightly open hands. My stomach twisted in a way I didn't understand. I told her no. She stared at me a long moment, like she was studying my pupils. Then she checked a box on her clipboard and dismissed me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bunk staring at the dark window, convinced I'd missed something important. A detail, a glimpse, a shadow that wasn't a shadow. I lay awake until the morning briefing, where Sutton pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't ever say yes. Even if you do see him, don't admit it." When I asked why, she just shook her head and walked off fast. For the next week, the forest felt tight around me, like every tree leaned inward. The air felt heavier. The silence felt thicker. Every twig snap sent my hand to my flashlight. On the fourth day, I hiked the South Loop at dusk, sinking into that orange-blue twilight where every branch looks like a person and every silhouette might be someone standing still. Halfway through the trail, I froze. Something was wrong with the clearing ahead. I couldn't explain it, but my body reacted before my brain did. My pulse picked up. My breathing thinned. I stepped slowly into the clearing, sweeping my light left to right. And nothing was there. No animals, no wind, no sound. Just stillness so absolute it felt staged. Then I noticed the tree line. Every tree looked normal except one, a single tall pine with no branches on the lower trunk, clean and bare. And at the base of that trunk, something darker than shadow stood perfectly straight, perfectly still. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. My brain literally couldn't register the figure as a person at first. The shoulders were too level, the posture too straight, the silhouette too rigid. I raised my flashlight slowly, and the beam slid across the navy parka. My breath left my body all at once. He was tall, taller than I expected. His face was expressionless, not blank from distance, but blank like someone had drained every trace of emotion from it. He didn't blink when the light hit him. He didn't squint. He didn't look surprised or annoyed or curious. He just watched me with the patience of someone who had been there long before I arrived. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I wasn't scared he would attack. I was scared he wouldn't. That he would just stand there forever, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I stepped back, slow and smooth, trying not to break eye contact. He didn't move, not even a twitch. I kept backing up until a branch snapped under my boot. In the echo of that tiny sound, he shifted, just slightly, not forward, not toward me. Just a small adjustment of weight, like he'd been standing so long his legs needed recalibrating. That one motion made my entire body lock up. It wasn't the movement itself. It was the calmness of it, the deliberateness, the absolute lack of reaction to me. A predator reacts. A hunter reacts. This man didn't. He simply acknowledged sound. My presence, like he'd been waiting for it. I turned around and walked away, choosing not to run, choosing not to look back even once. The forest behind me felt alive and aware, but I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breath. Nothing chased me. It took me 40 minutes to reach the station, and every step felt like walking out of a nightmare. I still wasn't convinced I'd fully left. I didn't report it. Sutton's warning echoed in my skull. Don't ever admit it. Don't say yes. 2 days later, Ranger Patel found me in the gear room and asked if I'd noticed anything strange on the South Loop. When I said no, he nodded vaguely, but his eyes said he didn't believe me. That night, he didn't show up for the 10 p.m. radio check-in. We sent 2 rangers to look for him. They found his flashlight in the clearing, still on, pointing at that same bare trunk pine. No tracks, no struggle. Just the beam of light fixed at the exact spot where I'd seen the man standing. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. Every window reflection looked wrong. Every quiet moment felt like someone was watching me from behind a tree I couldn't see. 2 rangers pulled me aside the next day and asked if I'd seen anything unusual recently. They spoke the words softly like they already knew the answer. I lied, not because I wanted to, but because I understood something horrifying. Once you admitted you saw the man, your days were numbered. Patterns weren't random. Patterns meant inevitability. 3 rangers gone in 6 months. All reported him before they vanished. I held on as long as I could. I held on until the night I walked past the front windows of the station, glanced out into the dark parking lot lit by a single buzzing floodlight, and saw him standing under it, facing the building, facing me through the glass. He didn't move. He didn't gesture. He didn't react when I froze. He just watched me with that calm, timeless, empty patience. I blinked once. He didn't. I blinked twice. He didn't. When I blinked a 3rd time, and my eyes reopened, he was suddenly closer, 10 feet from the last spot. No walking sound, no footsteps on gravel, nothing, just closer, waiting. My throat tightened, because I finally understood the truth. You don't see the man because you're being hunted. You see the man because he's already chosen you. I didn't move for a long time. I stood inside the station doorway, staring through the glass at the man standing under the floodlight like he had been carved out of the air. Snow drifted around him in slow spirals, clinging to the navy parka without melting. And for a moment, I wondered if he even felt cold. The rest of the world seemed to drain away, until all I could hear was my own pulse thudding in my ears. I wanted to call out for the others in the station, but something inside me refused to make a sound, like bringing attention to him would make whatever was happening to me move faster. He didn't move as I backed deeper into the hallway, but the certainty that he knew exactly where I was never left my bones. I turned away from the window for only a second to catch my breath. 1 second. And when I looked back, he was gone. Not walking away. Not fading into the dark. Just gone, like the air had swallowed him. I locked every door I could find in the station. I checked the gear room, the bunk room, the map room, the bathrooms. I walked with my flashlight held tight like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I expected something. A footprint, a shadow, a sound. But the station was completely silent, and the silence made my skin crawl. When I returned to the main hallway, the floodlight outside flickered once and died, plunging the lot into darkness. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, like a stranger trapped behind glass. Every ranger who vanished had reached this point, the point where they couldn't leave the station, couldn't stay in it, couldn't ask for help without being marked as paranoid. I made my decision at midnight. I grabbed my pack, my radio, and the spare keys, then left through the rear emergency exit. I walked into the forest because that's what he wanted, and that's what every ranger before me had done when they realized the truth. There was no running, no hiding, no alternative. You went to the place where you'd last seen him, or he made you go. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing the forest in a thick, suffocating stillness that erased footprints almost as fast as I made them. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The beam of my flashlight caught the edges of branches that looked like skeletal fingers reaching across the trail. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. My breath left my body in a thick cloud as I took in the scene. The clearing was exactly as it had been the day I first saw him. Silent, empty, too still. But this time, something was different. My flashlight illuminated Ranger Patel's abandoned radio lying in the snow. Next to it was Sutton's glove. Beside that, a strip of reflective tape from Mitchell's vest. Each item placed perfectly, methodically, like markers on a map. A pattern laid out for me to follow. A timeline of disappearances arranged with surgical precision. I felt the world tilt around me as I stepped closer. I heard the first footstep behind me then, soft, almost gentle, but heavy enough to compress the snow. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My mind screamed to run, but my legs locked in place. Another step, then another, slow, patient, certain. The air around me tightened. My skin prickled. Every instinct in my body knew exactly who was behind me before I even saw him. I forced myself to turn, slowly, inch by inch, because I needed to see him. I needed to confirm that this wasn't a nightmare, despite every fiber of my being begging otherwise. He stood 10 feet away, closer than he had ever been. His expression was still blank, but now I could see the details. Lines on his face that looked carved, not grown. His eyes were dark, not empty, but impossibly calm, like nothing in the world could surprise him. He lifted his hand slightly, not in a greeting, not reaching for me, just acknowledging my presence the way someone acknowledges a clock striking the next hour. A scheduled moment arriving exactly when it was supposed to. My breath shook as I tried to speak, but no words came out. He took one step toward me and something inside me collapsed. It wasn't fear, it was acceptance. A grim certainty that whatever fate had taken the others had now arrived at my doorstep. He didn't need to chase me. He didn't need to overpower me. The pattern was already complete. The moment I saw him the first time, the ending had been written. I felt the snow settle on my shoulders as the forest pressed in around us, sealing the clearing like a tomb. He stepped closer and I noticed something that made my heart drop. Something I hadn't seen before. On the front of his parka, sewn into the fabric, was a ranger patch. Not our current patch. An older version. One retired years ago. The kind worn by rangers who had gone missing decades before I ever joined. I understood then. He wasn't a phantom. He wasn't paranormal. He was a man who had once been one of us, consumed by whatever darkness the forest bred in its loneliest corners. And now he came back again and again, choosing the next ranger, pulling them into the same fate. He reached the edge of my flashlight beam, and the light flickered across his face. His eyes finally blinked once. Slow, deliberate, almost gentle. A gesture of recognition, a gesture that meant my place had been chosen. And in that moment, as the cold settled deep into my bones, I realized the final truth of the pattern. We didn't disappear because he hunted us. We disappeared because we followed him. The flashlight died in my hand. The snow swallowed the clearing, and I followed,